Magandang gabi, good evening. I'm Robert Floor, co-chair of Pinoy Words Express Cultura Arts. Welcome to the 40th anniversary of the Filipino American National Historical Society 2022 conference. This evening we'll begin with the Pacific Northwest Filipino authors reading. This reading is sponsored by the Greater Seattle FANHS chapter and funded by a generous grant from the Soriano Family Fund. Before the reading begins, I ask that you please join me in recognizing the Native Americans on whose land we have gathered. We acknowledge we are on stolen Coast Salish land, specifically the ancestral lands of the Duwamish, Puyallup, Suquamish, Stillaguamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot. Filipino American communities in the Pacific Northwest and Alaska have long held a bond with the Native American communities. We honor with gratitude the land itself, our brothers and sisters of the Salish people and the Duwamish tribe. I also wish to pay tribute to Auntie Dorothy and thank her for the many creative years of inspired leadership and service. You know her and Uncle Fred as the dedicated founders of FAWNS. I know her from having been an original member of the Filipino youth activities in 1956 and 57, and as a member of Maryknoll Immaculate Conception churches. Both these churches provided foundations for the Seattle Filipinos from the early 1900s to present. Salamat po, and congratulations, Dorothy. And I know everybody is curious about your next adventure. Tonight's host and producers, who will also read, are Jen Soriano and Troy Osaki. Both are fabulous writers in their own right and will shepherd us through this evening's program. Their bios are available in your conference packets and in the online slides. Troy Osaki, I feel I've known forever. I had the pleasure of knowing and working with his grandfather and both parents for many years in the community. Troy is a three-time Grand Slam poetry champion and recipient of grant awards from Kundiman, Hugo House, and the Jack Straw Cultural Center. He has published in numerous journals and is competing his first poetry collection. Jen Soriano is an accomplished writer known for her innovative creative nonfiction. She has earned a Pushcart and Best of Net nominations, as well as prizes from the Center for Women Writers and Food Literary Journal. She is also a talented communication strategist and a leader in movements for racial, economic, and climate justice. She has worked for numerous social justice agencies through the years. I know you will enjoy spending the evening with them and the other talented writers. In a few minutes, we will hear from 13, maybe 12 writers. Rebecca Magbala-Mayor unfortunately has a family issue to deal with, and so she can't be with us tonight. And we're not sure about Ebo because Ebo is in Hawaii, who is having technical problems. You will experience tonight a variety of literary genres and a sampling of their works. A list of some of their publications, including where their books may be purchased, is provided. During my many years of education, I experienced few writers of color and no Filipino writers at all. It has been a long-term objective of mine to include and recognize Filipino authors in the literary world. In 1970, I developed a section in the Seattle Schools Teacher's Manual, which included poetry from the scant few Filipino American literary figures I knew at that time. Authors included notables as Carlos Bulosan, Victorio Velasco, and Serafin Siquia. My central question at that time was, and still is, where are our poets, novelists, and playwrights? Why weren't they included in classes and courses in grade school, high school, or college? This evening provides a sample of current Pacific Northwest Filipino writers engaged in a renaissance that is also occurring nationally. I believe it will alter the narrative of American literature by bringing these writers and other BIPOC writers into the American consciousness. So it's with great pleasure and a word of thanks to Adoriano for his tremendous technical support that I give you Joy and Troy to lead us through this evening. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy yourself.
Thank you, Uncle Bob. Thanks for kicking us off tonight. And good evening, everyone. Happy sunny summer Seattle day. I hope everyone is enjoying the very wonderful 2022 FANHS conference so far. Again, my name is Troy, and I will be co-emceeing tonight's program with the award-winning writer, scholar, and performer Jen Soriano, author of the chapbook Making the Tongue Dry and the lyric essay Nervous, forthcoming in 2023. Tonight, we're very excited to present 13 Pinoy writers who will be sharing their work related to Filipino American history. So you'll hear stories about migration, personal and family experiences, and beyond. And the way tonight's program will be structured is Jen and myself will alternate introducing each incredible reader, who will then share for 5 minutes, with the exception of tonight's feature, who will share for 10 minutes. And as Uncle Bob said, there is more information on each of these authors that's compiled online that we would love for you to check out to support and learn more about them and their various works that they have out. One request we do have before we begin is for audience members to please refrain from taking any video or screenshots of the program tonight. A video is being recorded on our side and will be released to FANHS organizations and social media outlets, so you can stay tuned for that. But with that said, that wraps up all the logistics. So we'll get right into the night's program, and I'll pass the virtual mic off to my wonderful co-MC Jen Soriano, who will introduce our first spectacular author and feature of the night. So Jen, I will tag you in.
Thank you, Troy. All right, without further ado, I am pleased to introduce our featured reader for the night, a mentor of mine. Rick Barrett was born in the Philippines and grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. He has published 3 volumes of poetry, The Darker Fall, Want, and Chord, all published by Sarah Band Books. He directs the Rainier Writing Workshop at Pacific Lutheran University, an excellent program. His 4th book of poems, The Galleons, was published in 2020 and was longlisted for the National Book Awards in Poetry. Thanks for being here, Rick.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Great. Good evening, everyone. I'm really so honored to be part of this gathering of Filipino American authors celebrating our community and our literature. Many thanks to the Filipino American National Historical Society Conference for hosting this event. Also, much gratitude to Bob Flor, Troy Osaki, Jen Soriano, and Adoriano for their really heavy lifting in organizing this event. I know how much work goes into events like these, so really hugs and kisses go their way. And also thanks to the writers reading tonight. The nice thing about reading first is that I get to relax and really enjoy your readings. Have my drink. I'm going to read 4 poems tonight. All of them are part of the title poem from my recent book of poems, The Galleons, and I'll flash it. This is what it looks like. The book is primarily an elegy for my grandmother, who died in 2016 at 92 years old. But in addition to meditating on her long life, the book is also about history as a large, complicated, and unfolding phenomenon. So the first poem that I'll read is the opening poem in the sequence, and it's titled The Galleons Won. And the woman mentioned in the poem is my grandmother, whose name was Maria Omega Pascua. The Galleons Won. Her story is a part of something larger. It is a part of history. No, Her story is an illumination of history, the matchstick lit in the black seam of time. Or no, her story is separate from the whole, as distinct as each person is distinct from the stream of people that led to the one and leads past the one. Or her story is surrounded by history, the ambient spaciousness of which she is the momentary foreground. Maybe history is a net through which just about everything passes, and the pieces of her story are particles caught in the net. Or her story is a contradiction, something ordinary that has no part in history at all, if history is about what is included, what is made important. History is the galleon in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, in the middle of the 16th century, swaying like a drunk who will take 6 months to finally reach his house. She is on another ship centuries later, on a journey eastward that will take weeks across the same ocean. The war is over, though her husband is still in his officer's uniform, small but confident among the tall white officers. Her hair is marcelled like a movie star's waves, though she has been too sick with the water's motion to know that anyone sees her. Her daughter is 2 years old, the blur of need at the center of each day's incessant rocking. Here is a ship, here is an ocean, here is a figure, her story a few words in the blue void. So that poem really centers on this iconic image I have of my grandmother crossing the Pacific right after World War II to come to the United States. And it's this kind of glamorous, but also kind of painful image that I have of her because it took weeks to get across that ocean. And the story that she likes to tell is that she was seasick the whole entire time. So this next poem I'm going to read is called The Galleons 3. And the story I tell in this poem is a true one in that I really did have an intense conversation with a long-haul truck driver who was sitting next to me on an airplane. And listening to him talk about his work, carrying all of that cargo all over the country, I had sort of this, maybe an epiphany that everybody already knows, that capitalism and consumerism are very much an extension of colonialism and the violence of colonialism. So this is called The Galleons 3. Because I'm one of those people who will talk to you if you are next to me on an airplane, I'm telling the man beside me about my life as a teacher and my life as a poet. He is in his early 30s. He had served in the Marine Corps in Afghanistan, and now he works as a long-haul truck driver. I was going home. He was going home for a long weekend visit with his parents. When I ask if he has a wife and kids, he says that he has a dispatcher. When I ask about Afghanistan, he says he has a dog from a shelter named Felix, who stays with his parents during the weeks he is away. When I tell him I'm trying to write a poem about the Spanish galleon trade, he tells me about the things that he has carried: hay from Nebraska to Florida, TVs from Delaware to Mississippi, bark from California to Texas, refrigerated goods from Missouri to North Dakota, rolls of carpet from Alabama to Minnesota, Victoria's Secret stock from New York to Arizona, iPhones from Washington to Iowa, and unspecified hazmat materials that went with a security escort from Michigan to Ohio. He had been driving for 2 years, but eventually wants to get a day shift delivery job with FedEx or DHL or UPS. Close to home and close to my bar, he says. On the long hauls, he listens to audiobooks, mostly thrillers and fantasy novels, and keeps track of the number of miles he has driven, hoping to reach 1,000,000 one day. On his phone, he shows me a photo of Felix, a brown dog with an old dog's gray muscle, one eye softly brown, the other eye marbled gold and green, like the weather on another planet. The next poem I'm going to read is set in Madrid. When I was working on this book, I had the really great privilege of going to Madrid to do some research. And so this poem is set in that city of origins, and it tries to, I think, reflect on what it means to be in that city with its beauty and its many ghosts. The poem is titled The Galleon's Nine. In Madrid, I orient myself. I walk on the wide boulevards and know an empire is its boulevards. I stand below the angel, skeptical of the beauty of angels. At the royal gardens, I count the 138 kinds of dahlias. At the Crystal Palace, I imagine the exhibition of plants indigenous to my islands. I walk up the street of the poets and read the bronze lines on the ground, the longing and the song of the pirate. In one museum, I stare at Picasso's light bulb. In the oldest neighborhoods, I wonder if José Rizal walked these streets, studying diseases of the eye during the day, writing his novel in the night. In another museum, I look at the paintings of the dwarves, the horses, of the undying fruit in still lifes. In the train station, I visit the memorial for the murdered. In the great white square at dawn, I walk and I inscribe myself like letters on a page on the square. At the Royal Naval Museum, I look into the face of Magellan and I show the painting my face. I sing the neighborhoods of Huertas and Chueca. Maybe only in Madrid is the light a gold weight always. At the supermarket, I overhear two Filipinos speaking, and I turn away and I break. I find myself in a cathedral, in the movie theater, where I watch a movie without understanding the words spoken. Around a corner, I stop because a kind of meadow has been grown in the side of a building, like a tallness of heart, a dream carried into waking, my life breathing before it, incredible and true. So thank you all very much for listening. This is the final poem that I'll read, and it's also the final poem in the Galleon sequence. And as Jen mentioned, I was born in the Philippines. I was born specifically in Cebu. And I spent the first 10 years of my life in Ormoc City in Leyte. So a very big part of my psyche is still in that place, even though I consider Oakland my hometown now. So this is the Galleon's 10. I come from the lowlands. My mother's city was built on the river where the mountains fanned out to the sea, and the city thrived there. I come from farmers. I come from childhood's green radio, from the calachuchi tree and its white flowers. I come from prayer. My parents took me to a faith healer once, though no one now recalls the malady or the terms of the cure. I had a fate. It took me across an ocean. It has taken half a life to turn back and see what it was I left behind. I come from teachers and soldiers. On the island where my father comes from, the people covered their bodies with tattoos. I come from soot. I come from ink. I come from people who honed their teeth to sharp points, who buried their dead in coffins shaped like boats for a journey. I come from horizon. I come from water. Thank you all very much for listening.
Wow, thank you so much, Rick. Thank you, thank you. Still thinking about all these lines. Who buried their dead in coffins shaped like boats for a journey. Thank you so much for sharing tonight. Okay, I am very excited to introduce our next writer, who has a very amazing reading voice. But up next, we have Donna Miscolta of Filipino and Mexican heritage, is the author of 3 books of fiction: When the De La Cruz Family Danced, Living Color, Angie Rubio Stories, and Hola and Goodbye, Una Familia and Stories. Her most recent book was named the 2020 Latino Books of the Year and won the Next Generation Indie Book Award for Multicultural Fiction and International Latino Book Award Gold Medal for Best Collection of Short Stories. Please help me welcome Donna.
Thank you, Troy, and thank you also to Jen and Bob and Adore. So pleased and honored to be among these wonderful writers. I want to point out the 2 photos behind me. In the family portrait, my father's on the right and my grandfather's in the middle. And the street scene is the street that my father's family lived on after the war. And so they're sort of related to the piece I'm going to read. What I know about dismemberment. My father's ears. My Filipino father had big ears. His Filipino father had big ears. I have big ears. Once when I was getting my hair cut, the stylist paid me a compliment. I thought she said I had good hair, which I do, or did, no matter. What she really said was that I had good ears, long lobes, which signal good luck. The long lobes offer ample real estate for adornment, which my ancestors in pre-Spanish times used to full advantage, challenging the tensile strength of their distended lobes with heavy gold jewelry, soon confiscated by the colonizers. I too favor earrings that dangle. Small, delicate studs are lost in my expansive lobes. The ears are the only part of the body that continue to grow as you age. When I'm 80, my ears will be the most prominent feature, hanging like miniature kites on my head. If I live to be 100, maybe my ears will reach my shoulders. I will have to lift them up when I put on a sweater. If my ears were to be cut off, I would lose my resemblance to my father and his father. If I lost my ears, I would lose my luck. My mother's hands. My Filipino Mexican mother had ugly hands. Her Mexican mother had ugly hands. Mendelian genetics insist I continue the pattern. Thick fingers, big knuckles, bumpy with veins and lined with wrinkles, eventually age spots, but strong. I watched my mother make tortillas once. They did not comply with her unpracticed hands and they ended up in the sink. But her mother's hands worked the masa regularly, the way others before her had done since before Cortez. This, I think, was a source of their strength, which eclipses ugliness. I never took care to moisturize, never had a manicure, never wore fingernail polish, and until I married, never wore rings. Now I wear my mother's ring, a flashy corsage of stones that say, look at me, look at my hands. If you cut off my hands, you will take my inheritance. My grandfather's nose. In 2017, in Place Quezon in Las Piñas, Philippines, I stood where my father might have stood in 1970 on his first and last visit since leaving the Philippines in 1947. Place Quezon is where I met Lorenzo, lifelong friend of my father's family. It was a Christmas season and he was making a parol from the Spanish farol, nimbly fitting the bamboo sticks together. At first, Lorenzo seemed aloof, even indifferent to my presence, his whole focus on the star-shaped lantern he was constructing, until it was mentioned that I was a descendant of Rosendo. He stood up right away. He looked at me closely with tender scrutiny, and I, sensing a moment, did not flinch. He drew back to deliver his pronouncement that I had the face of Rosendo. My nose was like his, straight, a relative term concerning Filipino noses. Nonetheless, the comparison sent a shiver of connection down my spine to this place and to my grandfather. My nose is Rosendo's nose. My nose is a mestizo nose, indigenous in Spanish. Cut it off, but the fact of colonization remains. Thank you.
Amazing, Donna. Thank you. Troy's right. I could listen to you read all night. That voice, those words. So next up, we have Sam Rojas Chua heading down to Portland from Seattle. Sam Rojas Chua is the author of Saying Your Name 3 Times Underwater, Echolalia in Script and Fawn Language. His poems, artworks, and asemic writings have appeared in journals including Narrative, December Magazine, Cream City Review, and an essay/review of his 2 recent books appears in the Georgia Review and Rhino Poetry. His current project is an 8-week artist writer residency at Portland Chinatown Museum. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jen, and thank you, Rick. And I'm looking forward to listening to everybody's work. And thank you, Donna, as well. I'm reading 2 poems. First one is called Panata, which means vow in Tagalog. And the second one is 4 tongues. Panata. Please be guided accordingly for Carmelita. The doors of the palms are closing. The doors of the knuckles, its columnar castles, are breaking. The doors of the hands, its years of carrying groceries, turning keys, doors closing. The doors of the wrists are closing. The kitchen pantry is closing, bread minus the need. The bones of the forearms hang like boat oars. The doors of the elbow closing. The shoulder, its twin lookouts, closing. The valley of the chest is a cabinet, closing. The breastplates are breaking. A flood is coming. The doors of the feet are closing. The bridge veins are creaking. The arches are dreaming of cobbled stones. The heels are closing. There will be no more running or walking to the gate, the fruit tree and garden. The fountain is closed. The legs are turning into trees. The doors of the knees are closing. The thighs are locking. The seesaw has gone. The neck will tilt. The neck will turn into a tree. The door of the head will be the last to close. The doors of the face are closing. The doors of the ears are closing. The nose will close its doors with a mouth. The lantern of the eyes are dimming. The country inside the eyes are closing. The doors to the brain are disconnecting the inner routes. The brain is unwiring the years of memory and packaging them into orange capsules that will beam out of the eyes. The doors of the eyes are closing. The pupil will never be tardy again. The eyebrows will stand like soldiers one last time, and the electrics of the spine will support them. This is the hard part. The eyes will close, and there will be tears because the tongue will close its river, and it will be a fish out of water. And the mouth will expel the last air. The uvula will sing its last song. It will sound like birds. The song will be about a door. Someone will hear the song from a distance. Someone will clear their throat and remember to say your name holding a gumamela flower. And they will open a door and let sunset find its way to the kitchen table. There will be Maya birds there. There will be fruits on that table, and the sunset will turn strawberries into oranges, and all the fruits and the birds in the room will open an orange door, and that orange door will turn the room into a seed. And the soil outside hungers for the essential season of swallowing, and someone is circling a date on the calendar, and someone is circling a date on the calendar, and someone is circling a date on the calendar. Someone will learn how to speak to birds. Someone will kiss your forehead. Someone will press their ears to a door, and someone will eat light through a keyhole. And all the doors that happen to open at sunset will unhinge and fly into the sky, and someone far away will see flight patterns in the sky, and they will say, "Look at those birds, how pretty the flock at sunset, dancing before nightfall." Because at night is when all shoulders ache. At night, always at night, the cold, always the cold. Next poem is called Four Tongues, and it's dedicated to my fellow Filipino adoptees all over the world. Tigesi siya nga, guamama set siya si hua. I am Chua, flower eater. 不是你是ting tian, a pouch of coins. Siya si whistle, Yao Ting Tian. Yao from the Cobalt Emperor who took and took from the memory of hooflings. Ting Tian, mind health, a boy flake who fell from twin clouds in Jin and Pasai. Lai, my grandmother says, look close, Dinginao, ni kan kan, he has tea for blood. Chaya shui, 不是, not Chinese. Brown blood. Now drink your tea. Dim tala, cha'a, drink his blood, taste of brown. You'll see he is made from the river. Tagalog siya, but he's my son. Water or tea, he breathes watukonje, your air now. Found or not, fianchan lancher or not, he may drink the universe through my breasts, all he wants, all the universe he needs. What else can you give a boy without a name? Just like Moses in a basket, rivers passed him along, like the fiction of great aunts and sisters made of water and hair. Maniwala ka sa sarili mo, hindi nakikinig ang Diyos. Kaya ko ba? Cha'a or not, dead leaf or not, gua me, he's mine. To siya, ni siya mama now. Kay tige lang, self, takdit, kay tige lang. Nag-iisa ako ito, now drink. Thank you very much.
Wow. Wow. Incredible. I hope I heard this right. I think I'm still thinking of the line, someone will eat light through a keyhole. That was incredible. Thank you for grounding us tonight, singing your poems. We'll move on to our next excitedly next reader for the night, Diane Rodell. Her debut historical biography on her father, a Filipino rascal, Philippine Revolution to Korean War, is pending. Her writing has appeared in Rappler, Peace Corps Worldwide, UNICEF, FANHS Journal, Vanport Mosaic, and NYC Tenement, Ween Luke, and FANHS Stockton Museums. Please, can you help me give a warm welcome to Diane?
Thank you, Troy. And I'm honored to be with these wonderful writers. Hello, everyone else. This excerpt is from chapter 1 of my book and highlights the Spanish-American War, when my father, Dionisio Rodil, was 4 years old. I also dedicate this to the people of Kiev, where my mother was born. In 1898, Spain still ruled the Philippines. February 15, halfway around the globe, in Havana, the USS Maine exploded, killing more than half the crew. Despite little evidence, Spain was blamed. Americans screamed war. In Binondo, my grandparents read the morning papers with concern. February 26th, Theodore Roosevelt cabled George Dillon, commander of the Asiatic Squadron in Japan. He ordered Dillon to move his squadron to Hong Kong and prepare for war. Dewey spent March and April readying his ships, coal, and ammunition. On April 8th, my father gave me feel turned full, oblivious of these events. Despite the rumors of war, his non-eye wanted him to be happy. She likely made sumo for him and his 2-year-old brother Pedro. 2 weeks later, April 22, Spain declared war on the U.S. Hong Kong chose neutrality, and Dewey moved his ships, awaiting orders. He did not wait long. Congress declared war on Spain April 25. Manila was quite aware of Dewey's ships, and rumors soared. The Spanish Governor General in Manila would no longer ensure the safety of the American colony. Again, Manila felt like a war zone. Now, James Steele's parents had to be owned. April 27, Dewey sailed for Manila. His 7 ships left with a collier and supply vessel. He was on the USS Olympia in the early hours of May 1. With mass flooding, his ships sailed into Manila Bay, looking for the Spanish fleet. 5:05 a.m. Spanish shore batteries broke the hush, firing on Dewey's ships as they sailed past them. 10 minutes later, 5:15, the Spanish Aquilite opened fire. Dewey gave his order at 5:40. You may fire when you are ready, Gridley. Those explosions would have awakened the rebels. Their home was so close to the bed, they would have smelled the gunpowder. They would have heard collisions hearing in the streets. My father and his baby brother must have been screaming, despite comfort from their parents. The battle raged on. And Bill's knew not when it would end. Finally, at noon, the explosions
Wow. Thank you so much, Diane. What a gift to get such a close account of the Spanish-American War. That was amazing. Thank you. And next, I have the pleasure to introduce Charles Valley. Charles was born in Manila, Philippines, and immigrated to California when he was 7 years old. Since 2006, he has served as one of the poetry editors at FANHS magazine. and his work has been featured in numerous publications, including Denver Quarterly, Berkeley Poetry Review, among others. His first book of poetry, Proof of Stake, was published by Phonograph Editions in June 2021. Welcome, Charles.
Hello all, thank you for having me. Is my audio okay? Okay, I'll be reading from my book-length elegy called Proof of Stake. So it's, my daughter Vivian passed away in 2011. And so this elegy is dedicated to her, but it's a little bit like Rick's book in many ways in terms of exploring a lot of historical meditations, meditations on art and disruptive technologies, art history, everything. So I'll read a section from it, and thank you again. Regardless, canvas for the stretching followed Reconquista. Jesus in shades of burnt umber on hemp derivatives. Muhammad in erasure and absence. Prophets and prophets, skein to skein, Baroque is broken after history's serpentine movements, like the Portuguese Armada slithering through the Straits of Malacca, preparing to sack the cities and palaces of the Sultanate. The Portuguese infidels' reputations preceding them, secured through their piracy and savagery, sewing dog's ears on mutilated hostages, perhaps a bit too much for the heathens. I flipped through the pages of the Boxer Codex, the Tagalogs, the Visayans, the Negritos, the constituent caricatures, all in such vivid color, Vivian, your progenitors. The pre-colonial adornments, refinements, the weaponry, such unnatural gestures captured, bound in Chinese paper, timeless in reproduction, mythology blurring deities, demons, nobles, and warriors. Parts of me died each day with you, Vivian. Parts of me want to cover my body in your story. In Suyatse, in Kulitan, in pre-colonial script, diacritics and all. I think of Lapu-Lapu standing in the blood of Magellan's men, and it's hard not to project some trace of Hollywood in cathartic bloodshed, and it's hard not to project our 21st century concepts of freedom. Before Magellan, there were the Hindu and Buddhist and Muslim elites, datus and rajas, sultans and emperors demanding fealty, tributes, agreements. Lapu-Lapu was an animist, some say. Lapu-Lapu was a Muslim. Was he a pirate, a puppet, a pauper, a poet, a pawn, or a king? And what does it matter given the chance to slaughter foreign invaders with outrageous demands? It's the story of the Philippines, Vivian. Trade stipulations in religious disguises. Raja Humabon becomes Don Carlos. Cultures flattened, their detritus transformed, reattributed, disseminated via the Manila Galleon trade routes. The next couple centuries, a blur of revolts and uprising, dialects dying, social strata crumbling, reforming and crystallizing, a fragile 7,000-piece puzzle so perfect for smashing. And it's a stale wind whispering for change, Vivian. More conquest, more gods, more death. How do we unfuck ourselves? How do we get out from under the weight of it? Consider the catenary of our change curves. Derive the secant and tangents, shock to depression, no denial. It's 2019 and there's a man who wants me to go back to where I came from. There's a man who wants to call me up, and I'm not even there's a man who wants to teach me a lesson on supremacy. It's 2020 and the unctuous dreams unravel. The kids are toppling statues and monuments of old slavers and Confederate generals, some decapitated, some defaced, others decomposing in lakes and rivers, reckoning after reckoning. Oregon is on fire, Michigan is underwater, climate disasters the new norm. The socially distanced food lines keep growing, yet increasing less than the billionaires' coffers. Everything feels historical. Our empathic stores looted, moral reserves drained, essentialness always already redefined. And in certain ways, I am grateful that grief has become so decentralized, that everyone has a stake in the validation of loss. There are people who want me to believe in one history. They want us to become horribly synchronous again, as if we can ever negotiate the divide between those in power and the collection of peoples who mark time's passage by paycheck or harvest. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Charles. Wow, grief as decentralized. Yeah, bringing in centuries of history and your daughter Vivian into tonight's space. Thank you for sharing. Okay, up next we have Geronimo Tagatek, the author of the short story collection The Weight of the Sun. In 2019, his story The Summer of the Aswang won the Timberline Literary Review's Timberline Prize. His work has appeared in the Northwest Review, Orion, the Goldman Review, Phantom Drift, and the Timberline Review. Please welcome Geronimo.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to read among so many great and powerful writers. Thank you all very much. This is from a story called Stretched Toward Him Like a Dark Wake. On the night of August 15th, 1929, a heavy-set man in a luminous white linen suit stood and announced to the audience that anyone who could spend 10 minutes in the ring with a heavyweight champion of the Philippines would win $100. Jacinto's friends, knowing that he had a few fistfights to his credit, goaded him into the ring. 12 terrible moments after the attendants laced the gloves onto his hands, he climbed shakily out through the thick ropes, his 17-year-old cheeks swollen and bruised, his lips split and bleeding, and 2 of his left ribs cracked. He was nearly blinded by the blood in his eyes. In his dark hand, he held more money than he'd ever seen in his life. Jacinto stayed in Manila for 10 days, waiting for the bruises on his face to fade and the swelling to subside. Then he took the bus north to his family's hamlet in Baay. He went back one last time to the smells of rice paddies, the dense walls of cane fields, and the cool shadows of the bamboo groves of his boyhood. He spent a week saying goodbye to his father and mother, brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles. The day before he left, a feast commemorated the 1-year anniversary of his grandfather's death. When the priest prayed aloud for his grandfather's soul, Jacinto heard his mother's voice among those of the elder women in gentle refrain. After the sun had fallen beyond the soft fringe of trees, he looked across the firelight into his father's eyes. He knew by the iron stillness of the older man's face that his father was mourning both the loss of his own father and the impending departure of his eldest son. The next morning, his family walked 2 miles with him to the north-south highway. They waited more than an hour in the rising heat for the 2-wheeled horse cart to arrive. When it did, Jacinto's weeping mother embraced and released him. Then his father held his head between his hands that were as hard as wood and kissed him on both cheeks. "Do not forget us when you're gone." Jacinto looked into his father's sharp face and deep-set eyes. For the first time in his life, he began to understand what it was like to give up part of himself in exchange for the promise of something over the horizon. In the brief seconds that remained, he mapped the country of his father's face and voice, the feel of his hands, and the smell of his deep brown skin. And then he was in the booming cart, trying to hide his tears as he watched his father's form diminish into the shining apex of the road. From Manila, Jacinto sailed east across the Pacific, in the hold of a ship filled with men like himself, dreaming of returning to their villages one day laden with gifts for their families, carrying enough money to buy land, to marry, and to have children. The men often stood together on the ship's deck, looking out at the circle of the horizon, where the blue sky met the green blue sea. They sailed on, day after day. Beyond the slow rise and fall of the ship's hull, nothing seemed to move except the ship's wake, which was a restless arrow, pointing the way back toward their homeland. In the 10 years that followed, Jacinto held jobs in 100 places, washing dishes, harvesting asparagus, sugar beets, beans, and corn. He knew the ways of hoes and shovels, of pruning shears and ladders, of kitchen knives and saws. For 5 years, he lived in a world of farm labor camps at the edges of fields and orchards. He walked through towns where the sidewalks were filled with sounds of men speaking Tagalog, Bisayan, Little Manilas, they were called. He learned to foxtrot, waltz, and samba in the taxi dance halls on the outskirts of places like Sacramento and Stockton, where he paid the women a nickel for a dance and practiced his English on them. Sometimes he found himself pulled into the mouths of late night brawls that arose out of real or imagined insults. Jacinto spent 1,000 nights beside lonely irrigation ditches, empty roads, and railroad tracks gleaming beneath the stars. Thank you.
Thank you, Geronimo. Wow, I was so brought into that world. I really would like to read the rest of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm putting the link in the chat. All right, so next up, we have Duji Tahat. Duji is a Filipino Jordanian immigrant living in Washington State. They are the author of a few chapbooks, all of them award-winning. Here I Am, Oh My God, Salat, and Balikbayan. Along with Luther Hughes and Gabrielle Bates, they co-host the Poet Salon podcast. Hi, Duji.
Hi, Jen.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Really honored to be a part of such a legendary group of Filipino writers from whom I get to learn so much, stand on the shoulders of. I'm going to read 3 poems for you all from a manuscript that I'm working on. I think touching on some of the things that other readers have written about tonight. So I'll start with the poem called On Confession. Subjects who accurately counted the passes in a basketball game were visibly annoyed upon learning they'd missed the gorilla suit cartwheeling on the baseline, distracting from the difference between pre-verbal and post-language. Branch, 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 branch. The tree red flares, a matter of lighting, slips through the before of what was said and the desire to never say it again, to never say anything again, a vanishing, a returning to the land for the migrant begs the question which, how, and why. For starters, what was mine the longest was stolen last week. A red Mizuno sports bag I've had since I was 5. I'm disappearing. My impulse to fade is a bat at night, dive bombing toward the red fruit of the garden nested in the orchards my great-grandmother came to by marrying a man I never met who leased a plot from the Yakima Nation, not subject to state law barring land ownership by non-citizens. Filipino and Japanese immigrants cleared the sagebrush before being recruited for the war or interned, and knowing this, my desire remains to disappear. Still, my whole life I've been left to my devices. Here's I, loaded with God, ecstatic and erotic, pooled in a spoonful of light, seeming, for the time it takes to finish, less vain. A bankless narcissus, responsible for a failed marriage, many crying kids, a beloved repeatedly elbowed out of sight, restored, and again, so here I have to say, I am not my father. And if I end up alone, it will be for different reasons. Not even alone, his house brims as I turn the lock on my empty apartment, staying with my lover for the long weekend, looking at what I don't like. I call it an archive. And if my back hurts in the morning, it's because of how I slept. This next poem is called It's a long title. It's called On Devotion, or How It Came to Be That the Only Major American City Named After an Indigenous Person Whose Defining Characteristic Was Friendliness to Settlers is now the seat of a county named after a civil rights leader who warned against the recruitment of his memory in the service of empire. That's just the title. The white folks do land acknowledgements in historically Black neighborhoods. The International District has always been Asian, but perhaps because Hispanics, insofar as these are coherent categories, moved in next door, it changed. So now both live where once was a Hooverville tent city mayored by a weird woman with a broom. In my neighborhood, I'm new to the turn of the till on this patch of earth. The morning plenary of baubles in the bamboo. The blue jay's flight path, omen or portent, there are here smaller and fewer trees. So a different constellation of birds. Small gods for which I do not yet know how to pray, what bone to pick or burn, flit. I have never had a yard in the city. If the line is a plow pulled one end to another, readying dirt for seed, my sentences are the patch. The syntax of my garden make no sense some seasons, as in what floats above shape more than I would like to admit. Of course, there is what we say, and then there is devotion, for which, so hideously mortal, there is no de-peopled substitute. Cannot self-serve at a corner store or be delivered by drone. Devotion is the till, the tool, the towel that stinks even after the wash, the air that breathes you knows all manner of lungs and furnaces and shivers in the leaves, the trees, equanimity weathers. Feels so much like bravery and its interest in truth, or what it is as opposed to what I want it to be. Pain is not disorientation. Disorientation attends pain when we are not ready to be with hurt, to believe we can withstand what comes next. On TikTok, I learned urban planners planted male trees because they make less of a mess, and because private property is inherently theft, and because of misogyny, that's why my allergies suck. The history of displacement is basically invasion, but later I learned trees are in fact very queer. Most tree species have both male and female flowers. Either that or every flower has both pollen and ovaries. It is a gift to be in touch, to be with another, asking, to be owed, owing. Last one, a really short poem, a little sonnet called On Desire. Thank you again for the invite and allowing me to read with all of y'all. This has been great. On desire. A firm hand, the shadow waves of satin. I am not yet flesh. He calls me baby and I touch my face. I'm searching for God when I oil my body in the mirror. To love it means to love a man, means an opening to another man. When I take my glasses off, all the lines blur. A body is a body without language. I tell my girlfriend and she laughs, mouth wide enough to hide in. She shows me my softest parts. I dissolve into what? I forget hiding also means a good beating, the way passion can be suffering. I can't believe my whole life I never touched what made me holy. We have bread, butter, and nowhere to be. Thank you.
Let's go. Oh my gosh, these last ending lines. Not only did your poems bring light, but the way the sun is hitting you right now is making your face glimmer very beautifully, looking very great.
Thank you. Thanks for arranging that, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we talked to some folks. We'll let them know. But yeah, very excited for this manuscript and to hear more lines like there is what we say and then there's devotion. So thank you for sharing tonight. Oh my gosh. Okay. One of the reasons why I'm really excited about tonight is I have so many collections of everyone's of people who are reading tonight. And one that's in reach right now is this very beautiful book by the incredible writer, Michelle Penaloza, who is the author of Former Possessions of the Spanish Empire, winner of the 2018 Hilary Gravendijk National Poetry Prize. She is also the author of 2 chapbooks, Landscape Heartbreak and Last Night I Dreamt of Volcanoes. So please help me welcome the wonderful Michelle.
Thank you so much. This is such a beautiful reading. I'm so excited and proud to be a part of it. And thank you so much for inviting me. Also, so I'll just get into it. I will be reading nothing from that book, Troy, but I appreciate you holding it up. I'm going to read all new stuff. Okay. Or all not in a book yet that's published stuff. So new book, new poems. Inside my Lola's handbag. A sandwich bag of chicken bones. A sandwich bag of tissues used. A palm-sized Santo Niño, Louis XIV Sun King, skyflake crumbs and dust in his plastic hair. Werther's Originals wrappers. A sandwich bag of sandwich bags. Shout out, Lola. I know you're here. Happy about all those bags, very practical. Okay, so the next two poems I'm gonna read are, I'll put a link here. So I've been kind of going down the rabbit hole of various archives of pictures from the Philippine-American War. And a lot of them are often stereographs. So I put in a little link to a picture of what a stereograph is, sort of like primitive 3D. And stereographs, the technology of them became very popular and like, you know, accessible to more mainstream, not just like photographers for newspapers, but like any soldier perhaps going to the Philippines could take a picture, etc. So what I've become really interested in particular is these stereographs and their captions, the captions that are handwritten or that the photographer took. So let me drop this in the chat. I'm trying to be fancy, and of course it's being a thing. Sorry, one sec. Okay, here's, oh, maybe. Oh, shoot. All right. Maybe I'll just read the poem because the thing is not transferring. So you can just Google this title. I thought I'd give you an audio visual experience, but it's just going to be an audio one. Okay. Stereograph. After a typhoon, wherever the roof lands, there the Filipino makes his home. 1912, excuse me. All they can see through their little boxes, home, removed twice. Indio, Filipino, double, double. Any fool knows a roof intact is no miracle, but a blessing of design. What do they know of God's eye, the blink of mercy between rain bands of disaster? These Kano don't know anything about real rain nor real need to recreate. We know you don't pour a foundation in cement, but in the ability to rebuild quickly, to leave, to move by choice. We know the importance of elevation, how to endure floods, how important that snakes have their own abodes. Bubong, silid, silong. A music in the common sense of our homes. We know the land always provides. Kawayan, nipa, kahoy, dahon. Whatever we need to build again and 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 again. Okay, so this next one is also a stereograph. Schoolgirl in native dress, upper garment made of hemp gauze, Philippine Islands, 1907. To be a pupil of household industries, what it means to be a proper wife, the meaning they give me. I sit with my embroidery. They enter with great fanfare, direct me to sit here. They say docile to each other and not to me, thinking I will not know such a word. Know any words. Native made. I know not to look at them straight on. I know to sit here and exude the equanimity of an alien flower. I watch their shoes, the wool and whisker of them, as they shuffle and bid me to be as still as possible. I set myself to rigor as they disappear behind the camera, beneath the cloth. I hold a closed fan in my hands, which holds all my wishes to slap these men, strike this fan across their faces. When they shoo me away, I leave my broken fan twice. Okay, and this is my last one. So in this new manuscript, I've also just I have a lot of poems with a Tagalog phrase or word, and then sort of my lyric interpretation of them. So it's nice to have an audience that will know both. Okay, hanggang sa muli. We see our dead everywhere. A butterfly, a bat. Lola, Dad, is that you? Just today, I saw my father in the long finger of an okra, overgrown past peak deliciousness. It waggled at me, naku, not even good for deep frying, and reminded, look, tingnan mo. Always look close at your garden, at your hands, at the layers of dust and corner cobwebs gathered in the spaces you pass each day. There, I am here, always beside you, always swirling around you, inside you, only one breath away. Thanks.
Not even good enough for deep frying. Oh, that was amazing, Michelle. I can't wait for that next collection. And speaking of native made, I just want to point out these ating earrings that are being worn here. Yes, Michelle makes these. Check them out online. So next up, okay, well, actually, first, before I introduce our next person, I just want to mention that Doogie had called this reading a legendary crew. And I think that is absolutely true. This is a legendary crew. Hope you all are enjoying it so far. I feel blown away. Speaking of legends, next up we have Peter Bacho. Peter Bacho is the author of 7 books: Cebu, Dark Blue Suit, Boxing in Black and White, Nelson's Run, Entries, Leaving Yesler, and Uncle Rico's Encore. His books have received several awards, including the 1992 American Book Award. He is an adjunct professor at the Evergreen State College Tacoma campus and was born in Seattle and grew up in Seattle's Central District.
This is from an excerpt from Uncle Rico's Encore. And this is what makes Seattle a very special place in Filipino America. I sit here remembering, knowing that the first generation has vanished and that their children have had children, perhaps grandchildren too. With the stories of other immigrants from Asia, the Manong's attitude of defiance is unique. Such stories have not been told or have been forgotten or not listened to by too many younger Filipinos. But that indifference may be slowly changing. Young Filipinos have gone to Delano visiting, writing about, and producing films focused on Larry Itliong and the pivotal Filipino role in the 1965 Delano grape strike. In terms of shining, defiant moments in Pinoy history, it is hard to top Itliong and the Delano Pinoys for what they did in 1965. But such a moment does exist. In Seattle, it's all but forgotten detail described in a lawsuit argued before the U.S. Supreme Court, ILWU Local 37 versus Boyd in 1954. Every spring, Local 37 sent thousands of Pinoys north to the Alaskan salmon canneries. But the United States was in the middle of the communist hunting tsunami unleashed by Senator Joseph McCarthy, and Boyd, the Seattle-based district director of Immigration and Naturalization Services, was more than happy to do his part. His target, Local 37. In 1953, Boyd's office twisted federal immigration law and threatened to treat aliens domiciled in the continental United States returning from temporary work in Alaska as if they were aliens entering the United States for the first time. By 1953, many of Local 37's members had become American citizens, against whom Boyd's threat would not apply, but others were not. When the Philippines became independent in 1946, it cut the legal tie between America and its former colony. It also changed the status of thousands of Pinoys. Overnight, and despite decades in America, they lost their status and protection as American nationals. Aliens are what they became. And under US law, aliens seeking entry to this country for the first time could be excluded for any number of reasons, including disfavored political affiliations. Chris Mensalvas, the local's president, was the unreachable itch that triggered Boyd's obsession. Among Filipinos, the one-legged Mensalvas was legendary, committed, courageous, and tough. And Pinoys, no stranger to hardship, admired these traits. But he was also an unabashed communist, unforgivable during the paranoia of the McCarthy era, when many Americans yearned for peace and for simple answers to the questions raised by an increasingly complex and hostile post-war world. In 1945, the US and its allies had defeated fascism. Yet just the next year, Winston Churchill warned of an Iron Curtain caused by the Soviet Union's aggressive westward expansion. Then in 1949, China, an important wartime ally, fell to communist forces in that country's civil war. And finally, in 1950, American soldiers were battling Chinese communists on the Korean Peninsula. The speed and sheer scope of the global changes were breathtaking, not at all to America's liking. Within this unsettling milieu, Senator Joe McCarthy provided the snake oil to soothe the nation's jangled nerves. Subversives, he claimed, were the problem, and he knew who they were. Communists and sympathizers could be found in government, universities, labor unions, and the arts. His charges, most of which were unfounded, were dutifully reported by meek and uncritical American press. But in the early 1950s, the McCarthy era had shaped the tenor of American life, giving rise to blacklists, arrests, guilt by innuendo and association, terminations, and ruined lives. In those days, the INS building and Local 37 headquarters were within walking distance of each other. It must have galled Boyd and other immigration officials that a communist-led union could be so brazen as to openly operate and thrive in the agency's backyard. Hence the threat in 1953. INS's goal, I am sure, was to force the rank and file to remove Mensalvas. But he continued as president until 1959, or 5 years after McCarthy was censured by the Senate and 2 years after McCarthy's death in 1957. And each spring, and despite the threat, Local 37 would send Pinoys north for decades to come. But why were these workers, most of whom were not communists, so unfailingly loyal to a marked man? For starters, group solidarity, strengthened by years of racial hostility, had become an article of faith shared by members of the first Pinoy generation. This is how we survived. But that's not all. In 1984, I wrote this about Mensalvas. They stayed loyal to Chris because he understood them and their needs, and he spoke their language. That was his magic. He could speak to anyone, and that person would believe, or would at least want to believe, Chris's talent. That human touch worked in spite of his ideology, not because of it. In retrospect, the rank and file's defiance was both brave and audacious during a time when other Americans drew their shades and cowered in their homes. And turncoats kept busy naming names, but not at Local 37, where union members made abundantly clear that they, not the federal government, would choose who they wanted to lead them. That's our decision. It's who we are, the old Pinoy said. And, oh, one more thing, Mr. Boyd, Mr. Big Shot, Mr. Polished Florsheim Shoes, fuck you. That's it.
Thank you, Uncle. Always appreciate
Now, how's your parents?
Oh, they're
Good?
Yeah, they're great.
Give them my love and appreciation.
I will. Yeah. Appreciate you sharing your knowledge and lessons as always, and just highlighting the deep history of Filipinos here. in Seattle, and connecting it to the global context as well. Yeah, I will let them know you say hi.
Yes.
We have someone you all know, Troy Osaki. Troy Osaki is, well, first of all, Troy Osaki comes from a family very well known in Seattle, as you heard from Peter. We got a clue from Peter. And Troy is a Filipino-Japanese poet, community organizer, and attorney from Seattle, Washington. Troy is a 3-time Grand Slam poetry champion and recipient of grant awards from Artist Trust and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. He has earned fellowships from Kundiman, Hugo House, and the Jack Straw Cultural Center. He writes and hopes to build a safe and just place to live by uniting the people and reimagining the world through poetry.
Sweet. Hi, Jen. Thanks for co-emceeing with me. It's been really fun. And thank you to all the readers tonight, and to every the production team, and for those who are here in the room tonight and will be watching later on the recording. I'm just very grateful to be alongside so many wonderful folks that I've looked up to for so long now. This I'll be sharing a sonnet, a brief sonnet. It's about my grandpa, who was born in Bataan, and he came to the States in 1945 towards the end of Japanese occupation. So he was also a bit of a historian himself, which I feel very fortunate about, because he did a lot of documentation. And one of those things he documented was this speech called 50 Years in America by Tancredo R. Verzosa. And it's a speech that he delivered at a FANHS convention in Portland, Oregon in 1998. And I feel very grateful that, now that he's gone, I can still read some of his writings. And this speech is about a lot about his migration. And so, sharing just the various places he ended up, including, being drafted and being on like a shooting range in Texas, or, being at a FYA parade. So one really small paragraph I wanted to share before I read the poem was this piece, because it's connected to FANHS. So it's very short. He says, "I have known Fred and Dorothy Cordova for many years. I can remember very well their wedding in 1953, when the reception was the biggest one that I can recall. They rented the Seattle Chamber of Commerce Hall for the reception. I pray that I will still be around when they celebrate their golden anniversary on April 11th, 2003. So, thank you to FANHS, thank you to Uncle Fred and Auntie Dorothy and everyone who continues to keep FANHS going. It's a lot of history that's very important, and so just very grateful that this institution is around. This poem is inspired by another poem by Diane Seuss, and the title is after another title by the poet K.B. Brookins. And it's basically a list of places my grandpa slept through his migration. So it's titled, "And Somehow My Grandpa Finds Places to Sleep After Japan Invades. An American armada, one sheetless cot aboard a cargo ship. The cook tells him he doesn't like Filipinos. My grandpa stands in his briefs, soaked from swimming in the deepest part of the Pacific. Dripping, the atomic bomb flattens Hiroshima. A hotel room in San Francisco's Chinatown. The owner, Filipino, born in the same province my grandpa is from. Both remember the smell of every river before the death march. A Holly Park bench after asking in his best American accent for a raise, and instead his manager offered $2 to wash his house windows facing Lake Washington. 1962, at the Seattle World's Fair in the Coliseum shade, before his son is crowned FYA Little King, Paul, or Pablo in Spanish, after his dad, who didn't tell him what to do in America just to get there. All right. Thank you, everyone. We are down to our final reader for tonight, which is very exciting. Thank you all who have been here and witnessed tonight's sharing, and to all the readers for participating and contributing their gift, their light, to FANHS for holding this conference. We are going to end the night on a high point with another reader you are well aware of, Jen Soriano, again, who is the author of the chapbook, Making the Tongue Dry, and the essay collection, Nervous, forthcoming in 2023. Please stay tuned for it. She's the recipient of the 2019 Penelope Neven Prize, the 2019 Fugue Prose Prize, and Jack Jones and Hugo House Fellowships. Please give a warm welcome to Jen.
Thanks, Troy. So this picture behind me, some of you might know what it is. It's a picture of the Space Needle under construction. 1961, and this is around the time that my father came to the United States, and his port of entry was Seattle. So I'm going to read a piece about how my family got to the United States via Seattle, and it's called "This Land is an Exchange." So, with a shout out to Barbara M. Posadas for the historical context in this piece. You all know this one? If you do, I invite you to sing along. From the redwood forests to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me. I grew up in between the redwood forests and the Gulf Stream waters, in the breadbasket of the United States, the American Midwest, the heartland, in a flyover area of what would mostly be a flyover state, except for the city of Chicago. I grew up in a flyover area, at a crossroads of suburbs and sod farms, sloughs and septic tanks, on a gravel street sometimes littered with dead deer and turtle shells. As a child, I had no idea how we got there. According to our neighbors, my family spoke real good English, and they thought it was cool that we had an Italian last name. According to my parents, in their nonverbal language, we had always been there, grown there like the corn stalks rooted in Cargill soil. These yellow kernels of corn stuck hard to firm cobs hung from stalks that stood proud in rows that just made sense. When I saw those same kernels of corn appear in our bowls of ginataan and in our mouthfuls of maja blanca, I knew that my parents must have been right. We sprouted here. We fruited here. We never crossed the earth's largest sea. Later, I learned about my parents' migration. We speak of waves. In between the waves, there are ripples, like fields of rippling wheat that look like an ocean of golden brown. My parents rode one of these ripples to America during the time of quotas, when only 100 Filipinos could enter per year, because this was the quantity of independent little brown brothers and sisters the United States government deemed it could bear. unless you were a war bride, active military, or qualified for educational exchange. Before coming to America, my father almost took a job at the Philippine General Hospital. He also almost rooted himself in his birth soil as a doctor at a family clinic in Tondo. But he qualified for educational exchange, and so he went to America and stayed. Before coming to America, my mother had a pharmacy in Caloocan City, but she wanted to get a PhD in industrial pharmacy in New York. She would have qualified for educational exchange, but then she met my father. They got married and they stayed. Educational exchange happened through the J-1 visa system meant to, quote, promote a better understanding of the United States in other countries. Educational exchange was the source of some of the first Filipinos in the heartland, the self-financed pensionados, who in the early 1920s and 30s went to study mostly at Midwestern universities. To pay for their educations, they worked as waiters, bellboys, personal servants. Some worked on auto assembly lines in Detroit. Educational exchange was the source of how my family got here, on a program of skills trade, but also of pacification, of propaganda, and of foreign workforce development. Our America began as a pipeline of labor, a return on investment for the $20 million with which the US bought the Philippines from Spain. But our America becomes what we make of it. In a land of redwood forests, Gulf Stream waters, bars and stripes, we are the light of a yellow sun. To paraphrase Bulosan, America is in the eyes of those that are building a new world. To quote Harjo, these lands aren't our lands. These lands aren't your lands. We are this. To quote ourselves, listen to our stories, for they are how we got here. Our stories are our songs of love, and we will sing of us. Exchange the lyrics of this land with the words that we have tilled with our hearts. That brings us to the end of our program, and I'm just gonna call this historic. I'm just gonna say that. I think this is historic. What an amazing crew of folks. We wanted to just point out that almost everybody here has a book that they can share with you. And so if you want to check out these books, Adore has made this lovely slide that you can click on this link to get to, and it has a list of many of the books that are on offer. So please check them out. Support your Filipino American authors. And just wanted to also say, reiterate that this recording will be shared far and wide eventually. Uncle Bob was talking about maybe eventually integrating it into Filipino American Studies curriculum. So, you know, just want to thank everybody for being a part of something that is going to live on. That's the show. Thank you everybody for coming, and hopefully we'll get to see everyone in person sometime soon. Enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. It was wonderful.